Imagine a picture, a snow-covered plain as far as the eye can see. The wind carries snow dust, and in the distance, through the frosty haze, a silhouette moves. A huge, covered with brown wool with two curved tusks, each the length of an adult. This is a mammoth. Next to him, lurking behind a pile of boulders, stands a small group of people. They have no guns, no armor, or even iron tips, only pointed sticks, stones, and incredible courage. It would seem that a person against such a beast has no chance. A mammoth weighs more than 5 tons. A cave bear is able to break the ridge of a bull with one blow of its paw. A saber-toothed cat pierces the skin of prey with fangs the length of a kitchen knife. And a person? A fragile, two-legged creature without fangs, without claws, without thick wool, saving from the cold. And yet, 20,000 years ago, at the height of the last ice age, it was humans, not the strongest and not the fastest creatures on the planet, who didn't just survive next to these giants. They hunted them. They defeated them. And eventually became the only major predator to survive the end of the ice age almost without loss, while dozens of species of huge beasts disappeared from the face of the earth. How was this possible? Why were people not afraid of creatures that could crush them in one movement? And what allowed our ancestors not just to survive, but actually take the place of the main predator of the planet? In this video, we will analyze the world of the Ice Age, the animals with which ancient hunters coexisted, and most importantly, the strategies, tricks, and teamwork that turned the weak primate into the most dangerous hunter of the Ice Age. The world 20,000 years ago. To understand what people had to face, you must first imagine the world of that time. 20,000 years ago, the planet was experiencing the peak of the last glaciation. Huge glaciers with a thickness of kilometers covered North America and most of Europe. The level of the world ocean was almost 120 meters lower than the current one because huge volumes of water were locked in ice. Where today the forests of Germany or the prairies of Canada make noise, then there was a completely different ecosystem, the so-called mammoth steppe. It was a cold, dry, but surprisingly fertile plain, overgrown with grasses and undersized shrubs. It stretched from Spain through all of Eurasia, through what is now Siberia and the Bering Isthmus, a land bridge that then connected Asia with North America all the way to Canada. The mammoth steppe was a huge pasture, and herds of animals of such sizes grazed on it that today you will not find anywhere else except perhaps the African savanna, and even then with reservations. Here, woolly mammoths and woolly rhinos, giant deer with horns 3.5 meters in scope, steppe bison, wild horses, musk oxen walked. And after herbivores, there were predators, cave lions, cave hyenas, huge wolves. And among all this, small groups of people. Homo sapiens by that time had already settled almost all over inhabited land. They wrapped themselves in skins, built shelters from mammoth bones and poles, made fires, and passed on knowledge from generation to generation. Outwardly, these were people almost indistinguishable from you and me. The same height, the same brain, the same ability to think, plan, and negotiate with each other. It was the last ability to negotiate and act together that turned out to be the main weapon against the giants of the Ice Age. Neighbors on the glacial steppe, who threatened the man. Before talking about hunting, it is worth getting acquainted with those whom ancient people met on their way. The list is impressive. Woolly mammoth. The adult male weighed 5 to 6 tons, was covered with thick brown hair up to a meter long, and armed with tusks, which served not only for food but also a formidable weapon in battles. Mammoths were social animals. They kept herds, protected cubs, and, importantly, had an excellent memory and the ability to learn. That is, they could remember danger and avoid it in the future. Woolly rhino. Less social but no less dangerous animal. Weighed about 2 tons, carried 2 massive horns on the face, and was distinguished by a hot temper. Unlike a mammoth, the rhino often attacked first at the slightest threat. Cave bear. Larger than a modern brown bear, weighing up to a ton in the largest males. At the same time, according to paleontologists, cave bears mainly ate plant food, and direct collisions with people, apparently, happened less often than one would think. But meeting an angry or disturbed bear during hibernation was still deadly. Cave lion. Larger than the modern African lion, without a mane. An incredibly fast and strong predator that hunted large ungulates, including young mammoths and rhinos. Saber-toothed cats. In Europe and Asia of this period lived representatives of the genus Homo therium, large cats with long serrated fangs, adapted for hunting large prey. In North America, they were matched by Smilodon. The giant short-faced bear is an inhabitant of North America, one of the largest land predators of its time, capable of probably developing significant speed over short distances. The list goes on. Giant hyenas, huge wolves, steppe lions of North America. The world in which people lived 20,000 years ago was chock full of creatures, each of which theoretically could kill a person with one blow. And here the main question of the video arises: how in such a world did a person not just survive, but actively hunt its largest inhabitants? Why fear wasn't the main feeling? Let's start with the fact that modern ideas about the primitive horror of wildlife are most likely greatly exaggerated. Yes, individual meetings with a predator could really end in tragedy, and certainly ended. Archaeologists find the bones of ancient people with traces of bites of large animals. But these were exceptions rather than everyday life. The fact is that the Ice Age man did not go out one-on-one against a mammoth with a spear in his hand, relying only on luck. People approached the matter as engineers and tactics. Their main weapon was not a canine or a claw, but a brain. The ability to plan, use the terrain, tools, and most importantly, act in a large group where everyone knows their role. Modern hunter-gatherers living in a traditional way, for example, some groups in Africa or in the tropical forests of South America, still use similar principles. They do not rush to a large beast headlong. They study its habits for weeks, choose the moment, prepare the path of retreat, and work in a team where everyone has their own task. Scientists studying such communities believe that our Paleolithic ancestors acted in much the same way. Fear, of course, was present. A healthy, rational fear that makes one be careful, not paralyzing. But this fear was compensated by knowledge. Knowledge of the habits of the beast. Knowledge of the terrain. Knowledge that there were tribesmen nearby who were ready to help. It was this knowledge that turned the horror of a giant beast into the calculated confidence of the hunter. Man's main weapon: teamwork. If we single out one thing that has allowed man to defeat beasts that are many times superior in strength, it will not be a spear or fire, but the ability to cooperate. No single person could defeat a mammoth. But a group of 10, 15, 20 people acting in concert could. The fact is that numerical superiority changes the very nature of the fight. The beast, no matter how huge it is not physically able to simultaneously monitor the threat from all sides. While it turns to one hunter, another comes in from the side, the third from behind. Anthropologists suggest that such coordination required developed speech. To drive a herd of bison to a cliff or ambush a rhino, you need to agree in advance. Who drives the beast? Who blocks the escape routes? Who strikes a decisive blow? All this is impossible without a language that can convey not just emotions, but complex plans distributed in time and space. Moreover, such a hunt required trust. Each participant had to be sure that the comrades would not run away at a critical moment, that the prey would be shared honestly, that the wounded would not be abandoned. A society where such trust existed received a huge evolutionary advantage. It could safely extract food that was inaccessible to singles. That is why anthropologists say that man defeated the glacial giants, not with muscles, but with sociality. Weapons. How the Stone Age did without metal. The absence of metal did not mean the absence of technology. By 20,000 years ago, people already had an impressive arsenal. Spears with stone tips. Paleolithic masters were able to chop flint and obsidian with jewelry precision, creating tips with razor-sharp edges. Such a spear thrown or stuck with force was able to pierce the thick skin of a large animal. Spear throwing, or atlatl. This is perhaps one of the most ingenious inventions of the Stone Age. A simple stick with a hook at the end, which acted as a lever that extended the hand of the hunter. With its help, the spear flew much further and with much greater force than with a conventional throw. This allowed you to hit the beast from a safe distance without approaching the distance of hitting the fangs or horns. Throwing darts and stones. Lighter weapons were used to hurt, anger, or distract the beast, forcing it to move in the direction desired by the hunters. catching pits and fences. Excavations in different regions of the world show traces of artificial pens and pit traps, camouflaged with branches and snow. Driving the beast into such a pit or dead end was much safer than attacking it in open terrain. Using the terrain. One of the most effective strategies for hunting large herbivores is to direct the herd to a cliff, ravine, or muddy riverbank. Scientists find massive clusters of bison and horse bones at the foot of rocks in different parts of the world. Evidence that people used herd panic as a weapon, forcing animals to literally run towards their own death without approaching them themselves. All these methods are united by one idea. Man sought to minimize the risk of direct contact with an angry giant. To win with mind and distance and not brute force in close combat. This is the strategy of the Stone Age. Fire is the second most important weapon of man. If teamwork was the main intangible weapon of man, then fire was the main material one. The ability to extract and control fire appeared in the ancestors of man long before 20,000 years ago. But it was in the Ice Age that its importance became truly critical. Fire gave several advantages at once. Firstly, heat. Without it, it would be simply impossible to survive in the frosty steppe of the Ice Age. Secondly, protection. The vast majority of predators instinctively avoid open fire, and the parking lot surrounded by fires became a safe fortress even in the middle of the open plain. Thirdly, fire was used as a hunting tool. Flaming torches and burning branches helped to direct the movement of the herd of animals, frighten predators from prey, or conversely, drive the beast into the right trap. There is evidence that people arranged controlled fires in the steppes to migrate herbivores, burning old grass to cause the growth of fresh greenery in the right place and attract herds there. Finally, fire made it possible to cook meat, which made food safer and more nutritious, and therefore saved the body as precious energy that would otherwise have to be spent on digesting raw food. How to hunt specific animals. Let's look at a few examples of how exactly ancient hunters approached different types of prey. Here it is worth emphasizing, exact written instructions from Paleolithic people, of course, have not survived. And what we know is a reconstruction based on archaeological finds, cave paintings, and observations of traditional societies, which until recently hunted by similar methods. Mammoth hunting. Hunting for a mammoth was probably the riskiest, but also the most profitable venture. One carcass could provide meat, fat, hides, and bones to an entire group of people for many weeks, and bones and tusks went to build dwellings and make tools. A direct attack on a healthy adult mammoth would be suicide. Therefore, hunters appeared to most often choose a more vulnerable target, a young, sick, old, or wounded animal, fighting off a herd. A herd of mammoths, like a herd of elephants today, protected its members, but a weakened or isolated animal became a far more accessible target. One likely strategy was to gradually exhaust the beast. A group of hunters chased it for days, inflicting small wounds with spears and darts, trying not to approach a dangerous distance until the animal lost strength from blood loss and exhaustion. After that, it was safer to strike a decisive blow. Another method is the use of natural traps. A frozen swamp, narrow gorge, or steep riverbank could immobilize or weaken a large animal, making it an easy prey. Hunting bison and horses. With smaller ungulates, such as steppe bison or wild horses, a completely different tactic was used: corral hunting. A group of hunters with shouts, fire, and waving their skins drove the herd in the right direction. To a cliff, to a narrow canyon, or to a pre-prepared trap corral. Such hunting allowed to get many animals at once, providing the tribe with food for a long time. Hunting for predators. Hunting for cave lions, bears, or saber-toothed cats seemed to be a forced measure of self-defense rather than a purposeful fishery, although there is evidence of purposeful prey, for example, for the sake of skins and canines. In such cases, numerical superiority and fire again played a key role. A group of people with torches and spears surrounded the predator, deprived it of its main advantage: suddenness, forcing it to act in unfavorable conditions. It is worth noting that many large predators of the Ice Age apparently tried to avoid direct confrontation with groups of people. Not because they were afraid of people as such, but because any fight with a resisting victim was risky for the predator itself. Nature is designed so that the predator avoids prey that could injure him if there is an easier alternative. And an organized group of armed people was not an easy alternative. Knowledge of the terrain and habits of the beast. Separately, it is worth saying about the role of observation and accumulated experience. Ancient hunters were not random adventurers, they were, in fact, the world's best naturalists of their time, because life depended on the accuracy of their knowledge. People knew what time of year mammoths migrate and where watering holes are located, what trails animals use regularly. They could read tracks, droppings, scraps. By these signs, you could determine the type, size, age, and even health of the beast that had passed this way quite recently. This knowledge was passed on from generation to generation, supplemented and refined. A child who grew up in such a culture from an early age learned to distinguish the tracks of different animals, understand the weather, feel changes in the behavior of the herd, which foreshadowed danger or conversely, a good opportunity for hunting. It was this long-term, painstakingly accumulated expertise, and not blind courage at all, that allowed people to feel more confident next to giants who were formerly many times stronger than them. Role of cubs and young. It is worth mentioning separately that hunters rarely set the goal of an adult, completely healthy and strong male in his prime. This was the most risky and least profitable option. Much more often, young animals became prey, not yet physically strong, but already large enough to provide the tribe with meat. This was not a manifestation of cruelty in the modern sense. It was a manifestation of practicality and understanding of risks. Nature in general is arranged so that predators, including wolves and lions, often attack young, old, or sick individuals, precisely because the chance of successful and safe hunting, in this case, is much higher. Man, being not the strongest predator on the planet, followed the same logic but applied it more consciously and systematically. Life in hiding. Protection from predators in the parking lot. Hunting was only part of the survival story. Equally important was the ability to protect oneself, children, and the elderly in moments when the group was not hunting, but simply living in a parking lot. Archaeologists find the remains of Ice Age dwellings built from the bones and tusks of mammoths covered in skins, whole structures similar to large domed huts. Such dwellings not only protected from the cold, but also served as fortifications. A dense wall of bones and skin was a serious obstacle to the predator. The parking lots were often set up with defenses in mind. For example, on a hill with a good view of the surroundings, near a water source but not too close to animal trails. Campfires were maintained around the perimeter of the parking lot, and at night, apparently, duty was established. Someone from the group was awake, watching the surroundings and putting firewood in the fire. Dogs, or rather their direct ancestors, domesticated wolves, judging by archaeological finds, were already beginning to appear next to humans around this period of history. Such animals could serve as additional protection, warning of the approach of a predator long before it was noticed by humans. Social structure. Why the group was stronger than the single. It is worth dwelling on the very structure of human society of the Ice Age, because it became a real secret weapon against the giants. Hunter-gatherer groups of that time usually numbered from 20 to 50 people, enough to provide effective hunting and mutual assistance, but not so much as to deplete the resources of a limited area. Within the group, there was a division of labor, someone specialized in the manufacture of tools, someone in the exploration of the area, someone in the care of children and the elderly. The key point was that caring for the weak members of the group, children, the elderly, the wounded, was not a burden but a strategic advantage. The elderly members of the group stored a huge amount of knowledge. Where to look for water in a drought, how to behave when meeting a particular animal, which plants are poisonous and which are edible. This knowledge, accumulated over decades of life, often proved to be more valuable than any weapon. Moreover, anthropologists find archaeological evidence that even severely injured or sick members of the community sometimes survived for years, judging by the marks of healed fractures on the bones. That is, they were cared for, fed, despite the fact that they could not hunt. Such concern for each other strengthened social bonds within the group, and strong social ties, in turn, made the group more efficient and coherent in the face of external dangers, whether it was a harsh climate or a large predator. The psychology of the hunter. Calculation, not recklessness. Let us return to the question that was asked at the very beginning. Were people really not afraid of huge animals? It would be more correct to say this. There was fear, but it was manageable. Modern psychology of risk shows that experienced people who regularly face danger, for example, professional climbers, divers, or firefighters, over time learn to separate productive caution from paralyzing panic. Caution makes you carefully prepare, check equipment, think through an action plan. Panic, on the contrary, prevents you from acting reasonably at a critical moment. It seems that something similar happened with Paleolithic hunters. From early childhood, they watched the preparation of adults for hunting, participated in its less dangerous stages, gradually gained experience. By the time the young man first participated in the hunt for a really large animal, he already knew perfectly well what to do, knew the strengths and weaknesses of the enemy, trusted his comrades, and relied on a repeatedly worked-out plan. This does not mean that tragedies did not happen. Of course they did. Injuries, and sometimes deaths of hunters were part of the harsh reality of the time. But the system in which people operated, collective hunting, knowledge of the terrain, thoughtful tactics, kept these risks to a reasonable minimum, as far as it was possible at all, against an animal weighing several tons. Art as a reflection of the relationship between man and beast. Interestingly, the relationship between man and megafauna of that period can be judged not only by archaeological finds of tools and bones, but also by art. Rock painting of the Lascaux and Chauvet caves in France, whose age is from 15 to 30,000 years, depicts mammoths, cave lions, woolly rhinos, and other animals with amazing accuracy and detail. The artists of the Ice Age clearly watched the animals very carefully. They conveyed not just a general silhouette, but characteristic poses, movements, even it seems, individual moments of hunting or confrontation with the beast. This suggests that the relationship of a person with these animals was not just utilitarian, mined, ate, forgot. They had something similar to respect, even admiration for the power and beauty of these creatures. Some researchers believe that such images could have ritual or spiritual significance. For example, serve as part of ceremonies before a hunt, a kind of way to mentally prepare for a dangerous enterprise or express gratitude to a killed animal. One way or another, Ice Age art shows us people who were well aware of the scale and danger of the creatures among whom they lived, and that is why they treated them with a mixture of practicality and almost sacred reverence. Why man won but megafauna? For the most part, not the final and perhaps most intriguing question. Why exactly did man manage not only to survive next to these giants, but eventually survive the end of the Ice Age? While many species of megafauna mammoths, woolly rhinos, cave lions, giant sloths, and dozens of other species became extinct for several thousand years after the peak of the glaciation, scientists are still debating the exact causes of the mass extinction of megafauna at the end of the last Ice Age, and most likely it was not a single factor, but a combination of several. First, the climate was changing rapidly. Glaciers were melting. The mammoth steppe gradually turned into forests and tundra, and huge herbivores, adapted precisely to the cold, dry steppes, lost their habitat and food sources. Second, humans also appear to have played a role, not in the form of sudden extermination in one blow, but as an additional factor of pressure on populations that were already declining due to climate change. Large animals reproduce slowly. In the mammoth, like in the modern elephant, the pregnancy lasted about 2 years, and the cub matured for many years. Such biology works well under stable conditions, but makes the species extremely vulnerable when mortality begins to exceed fertility, even slightly. But man, unlike megafauna, had a tremendous advantage: flexibility. People were able to adapt to changing conditions much faster than any biological species. The game of one species ran out. People switched to another. Climate changed. People changed homes, clothes, hunting methods, diet. This behavioral cultural flexibility, not physical strength, and became the main evolutionary advantage of man. In other words, man defeated the Ice Age giants not because he was stronger than them, but because he was smarter and more flexible than them, and because he learned to do what no animal could do alone: to unite the efforts of many relatives for a common goal.